Welcome to Mr. Red Edit. Sit back, relax, and enjoy today's story. Happy viewing.
I always thought my family would be my rock, you know? Growing up, it was just me, Dad, and our routine. Dinners at 6, movie nights on Fridays. Then Dad met Margaret, and she came with a little surprise package. Leah, who was 5 when I was 12. From the start, it was clear Leah was going to be treated differently. Margaret adored her, and Dad, wanting to keep the peace, soon joined in. I tried to be the good big sister. I helped her with homework, took her to the park, and even let her borrow my things. But Leah wasn't interested in bonding. She was interested in winning. Leah was a master manipulator, even as a kid. She knew how to spin a story to get sympathy, and she quickly figured out that Margaret would take her side no matter what. If we had a disagreement, Leah would put on a dramatic show of tears, and Margaret would swoop in to comfort her while giving me a look that made it clear I was the problem. Dad, ever the peacemaker, would just shrug and say, "You know how kids are." I tried to let it roll off my back, but it wasn't easy living in Leah's shadow. As I got older, things got worse. Leah became the center of everything: holidays, family events, even conversations around the dinner table. She'd brag about her achievements while I quietly congratulated myself for getting through another day without losing my temper. Still, I never thought Leah would go as far as she did. It started small, with Leah making offhand comments about my friends. "Are you sure they're good people?" she'd ask Margaret while I was within earshot. Margaret would nod thoughtfully, her eyes narrowing as if Leah had just uncovered some hidden truth. Then, Leah escalated. One night, as I was getting ready to head out with friends, Leah caught Margaret's attention. "I saw something weird in her room," she whispered. Margaret's face twisted with concern. Later, she cornered me in the kitchen, demanding to know if I had drugs in the house. I laughed, assuming it was a misunderstanding. "What are you talking about, Margaret? That's ridiculous." But Margaret wasn't smiling. Neither was Dad, who had walked in halfway through the conversation. The accusations didn't stop there. Leah's lies got bolder, and soon she was telling our parents that I was not only using drugs but selling them. The idea was absurd, but the way Leah told it made it sound like a confession of sorts. "I just want her to be okay," Leah would sob, clinging to Margaret. My parents believed her without a second thought. I tried defending myself. "Leah's making this up," I said over and over, but my words seemed to hit an invisible wall. Dad and Margaret began searching my room when I wasn't home, looking for evidence. Margaret found a tiny plastic bag once. It was for earrings I'd bought at a flea market. But that didn't matter. She showed it to Dad with an expression that said, "This is the proof." I could feel the distance growing between us. They stopped asking about my day, stopped listening when I spoke, and started avoiding eye contact. It felt like I was losing a part of myself in this battle I hadn't even agreed to fight. I went from being a straight-A student who never missed curfew to the problem child practically overnight. Margaret's concern became unbearable. "We just want to help you," she'd say with a forced kindness that felt more like a dagger. Dad would nod along, avoiding my gaze. It was clear that my words had lost all credibility in their eyes. I never imagined it would get this bad. But Leah had mastered the art of manipulation, and I was just collateral damage. Little did I know, it was only the beginning of my nightmare. I felt like I was living in a nightmare. Every day, I tried to talk to my parents, hoping they'd finally realize how ridiculous Leah's stories were. "Can't you see that she's lying?" I asked them one evening, my voice breaking. But Margaret just shook her head, looking exhausted, as if I was the one dragging the family through this. "We just want to understand what's happening," she said softly, as if I were a ticking time bomb. Then came Leah's latest stunt. One evening, Margaret burst into my room, holding a small baggie of white powder between 2 fingers, her face a mix of fury and pain. "What is this?" she demanded. I stared, stunned. "I've never seen that before," I managed to say, my heart pounding in my chest. But the way Leah hovered in the doorway, biting her lip with a hint of satisfaction, made everything click. I knew she had planted it there, but I couldn't prove it. Margaret wasn't having any of it. "Do you know how dangerous this is? For you? For Leah?" she hissed, her voice almost desperate. Dad came in then, looking weary and lost, like he'd already made up his mind. I tried one last time. "Dad, please, you know me. You know I'd never do this." But he just shook his head, defeated. "I don't know anything anymore," he muttered, barely meeting my eyes. And that was the most painful part, seeing that spark of doubt, that flicker of love, just vanish. Margaret's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "We can't have you here, not if you're putting Leah in danger." The finality in her tone, sent a chill down my spine. I opened my mouth to argue, to plead, but I could tell it was pointless. They had already decided. Without another word, Margaret handed me a duffel bag and told me to pack. It was surreal, like the world had shifted beneath my feet. I grabbed what I could, clothes, some cash, a few personal items. The rest didn't seem to matter. When I walked out the front door, Leah was standing in the hallway, fake tears streaming down her face. "I just wish you'd get help," she whimpered, clutching a tissue like she was the victim. I wanted to scream, to tell her she'd ruined everything, but the weight of betrayal kept my mouth shut. I just pushed past her and stepped into the cold night air. I had nowhere to go. I called my friend, Jenna, who immediately offered her couch. "I don't get what's wrong with your parents," she said when I showed up on her doorstep, my eyes swollen from crying. "It's Leah," I whispered. "It's always been Leah." Jenna shook her head, pulling me into a hug. "You didn't deserve this," she said. But those words felt hollow because, deep down, I still hoped my parents would see through Leah's lies. The first few nights at Jenna's place were rough. I felt numb, like I was walking through a haze. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my dad's face, blank, distant, like he didn't even know me. I kept replaying that moment in my mind, thinking maybe I'd missed something, some chance to prove I wasn't what they thought. But there was nothing left to say. Leah had poisoned everything. Rumors spread quickly in our small town. People whispered about how I'd been kicked out, speculating about drugs and wild behavior. I lost my job a week later when my boss heard things and decided to let me go, just to be safe. I couldn't blame him. The lies had reached every corner of my life. I felt isolated and alone. I'd gone from having a family, a stable life, to being the girl everyone gossiped about, all thanks to Leah. Jenna did her best to keep my spirits up, offering wine, late-night chats, and terrible reality TV marathons. But nothing could fill the gaping hole left by my parents' rejection. I couldn't stop myself from checking my phone every hour, hoping for a text or call from Dad. But the silence was deafening. My mind kept going back to the last look on Leah's face as I walked out of the house. Those fake tears, the slight smirk that only I seemed to notice. She'd won, and she knew it. But I swore to myself then and there that I wasn't going to let her keep me down forever. I would find a way to rise above this, even if it meant doing it all on my own. The first few weeks after getting kicked out were the worst. Leah's lies spread fast, like wildfire in a dry field. It was bad enough that my parents believed her, but now it seemed like the whole town did, too. Jenna tried to reassure me that people would forget, that they'd move on to new gossip soon. But every time I stepped outside, I felt eyes on me, judging, suspicious, waiting to see if I'd slip up. Finding a new job became almost impossible. I'd go to interviews and see the polite smiles fade as soon as they asked about my last job. One time, the interviewer actually leaned in and asked, "So, I heard you were let go for stealing?" I felt like I'd been slapped. "That's not true," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but I could see that she had already made up her mind. Leah's stories had made their rounds. Even running into familiar faces in the grocery store became a dreaded experience. Once, an old classmate of mine, Jenny, approached me in the cereal aisle. "Is it true?" she asked, wide-eyed. "Did they really find drugs in your room?" I stared at her, stunned by the casual cruelty of her curiosity. I wanted to scream, it was Leah, but instead, I just muttered, "No," and quickly walked away. By then, I had realized that trying to set the record straight felt pointless. No one wanted the truth. They wanted the drama. Money was tight. I took whatever odd jobs I could find, cleaning houses, waitressing at a dingy diner, even doing some yard work for old neighbors who, thankfully, didn't care about the rumors. I saved every penny I earned, eventually managing to scrape together enough for a tiny studio apartment. It wasn't much, just a small bed, a table, and a creaky stove that took forever to heat up. But it was mine, and for the first time in a while, I felt a small sense of control. I was down, but not out. It was around this time that I met Alex. He came into the diner one afternoon while I was working a double shift. I was exhausted, with hair escaping from my ponytail and a coffee stain on my shirt, but he still smiled at me like I was the best part of his day. He kept coming back, always sitting at the same booth, asking me about my day. At first, I kept things vague, just the usual small talk. But one evening, as I was wiping down tables after closing, he offered to walk me home. I hesitated but accepted. On the way, I found myself telling him everything. About Leah, about my parents, about the lies that had upended my life. "I'm sorry," Alex said when I finished, his voice full of genuine sympathy. You didn't deserve any of that. He didn't ask the usual follow-up questions, didn't press for details, or try to solve my problems. He just listened. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of hope. Alex was different from anyone else I'd met since everything fell apart. He didn't care about the rumors or the reputation Leah had given me. He just cared about me. As the weeks passed, we started spending more time together. Alex was kind, supportive, and surprisingly funny. He had his own baggage, too, an estranged brother and a complicated family history, but he never let it define him. Being with him felt like breathing fresh air after being underwater for too long. He made me laugh again, something I hadn't done genuinely in what felt like ages. Slowly, my life began to stabilize. I got a part-time job at a local bookstore, thanks to Alex's friend who vouched for me. It wasn't glamorous, but I loved being surrounded by stories that weren't my own. I started saving up again, feeling a small sense of pride every time I made a deposit into my nearly empty bank account. Alex helped me see that I wasn't completely ruined by Leah's lies. I was still standing, still fighting. One evening, as we sat on the floor of my cramped studio eating cheap takeout, Alex looked at me thoughtfully. "You're stronger than you think," he said. His words hit me harder than I expected. I realized then that maybe he was right. I had been knocked down, humiliated, and betrayed. But I was still here, still trying. But as much as I tried to move forward, the pain lingered. Every once in a while, I'd catch myself glancing at my phone, hoping for a message from Dad. A small gesture that maybe he was beginning to see the truth. But it never came. I missed him. I missed the life I'd had before Leah turned it upside down. I still had nightmares where I'd see Leah planting that baggie in my room, grinning as my life crumbled around me. I'd wake up with my heart racing, reality crashing down on me again. I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't let Leah destroy me entirely. I was still angry, still hurt, but I had found a small piece of happiness with Alex, and I was determined to protect it. I wasn't sure where life would take me next, but I was ready to keep moving forward, even if it meant leaving some things, and some people, behind. Fast forward a few years, and things had finally started looking up. Alex and I had moved in together, and life felt normal, peaceful, even. I'd found a better job at a marketing agency, and Alex had been promoted at work. We had our ups and downs, but through it all, he was my rock. Then, he proposed. It wasn't some grand, over-the-top moment, just a quiet evening at home with pizza and a ring box that he pulled out of his pocket. I cried, of course, and said yes without a second thought. Planning the wedding brought a mix of emotions, excitement, anticipation, but also a dull ache in the back of my mind. I couldn't help but wish things were different with my family. As we went through guest lists, venue bookings, and caterers, I kept hoping my phone would buzz with a text or call from my dad. I knew it was a long shot, but some part of me still wanted him to care enough to reach out. But months went by, and my phone stayed silent. Then, just 1 week before the wedding, I got a message from Dad. My heart raced as I opened it. "We want to come to your wedding, but you have to invite Leah, too. She's sorry, and she wants to make things right." I sat there, rereading the words over and over. After everything Leah had done, after all the pain and lies, this was his condition? My hands shook as I showed the message to Alex. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Alex didn't hesitate. "This is your day, not theirs. You don't owe Leah forgiveness, especially if she's never truly apologized." He was right, of course. I hadn't heard a word from Leah in years, not even an attempt at reconciliation. Now, suddenly, she was sorry because she wanted an invite? I was furious. It felt like they were still trying to control the narrative, still trying to make me bend to their demands. I had spent too many years living in Leah's shadow, letting her lies define me. I wasn't going to let that happen on my wedding day. I took a deep breath and typed my response. "I'd love to have you there, but I can't invite Leah." I pressed send and felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. I knew what was coming, and sure enough, Dad's reply arrived within minutes. "Then we can't come either." I stared at the screen, feeling my heart break all over again. Alex pulled me into a hug, not saying anything. He knew there was nothing that could fix this. "I'm sorry," he finally whispered. "You deserve better." I nodded, trying to keep it together. Deep down, I knew I'd made the right choice. It was painful, but I had to protect the happiness I'd fought so hard to build. On the morning of the wedding, there was a brief moment when I wondered if my parents would show up after all, if maybe they'd change their minds at the last second. But as I walked down the aisle, I only saw Alex's face, beaming with love and pride. I felt a wave of calm wash over me. I realized then that this day wasn't about who wasn't there. It was about celebrating the people who were, the ones who had stood by me through everything. The reception was beautiful, filled with laughter and love. My closest friends made heartfelt toasts, and Alex's family welcomed me with open arms. At one point, Jenna pulled me aside. "I know this wasn't easy," she said, "but you deserve to be happy." I nodded, blinking back tears. "I know," I said, finally feeling the truth of those words. Still, as the night wound down, I couldn't help checking my phone one last time. There was a single message from Dad. "I hope you're happy, but I wish you had room for forgiveness." I didn't respond. I knew what he meant, but forgiveness wasn't the issue. It was trust, and Leah had shattered that beyond repair. I couldn't force a happy ending for my family just to make everyone else feel better. As I looked around at the people who were there, Alex, Jenna, and the friends who had become my new family, I felt a surge of gratitude. This was my fresh start, my chance to move forward without the weight of Leah's lies holding me back. I knew I would always carry a scar from what happened, but at least now, I was free to write the rest of my story on my own terms. For the first time in years, I truly felt at peace, even if the past still lingered somewhere in the background. The morning of my wedding felt surreal. I woke up to Jenna shaking my shoulder, grinning ear to ear. "It's your day," she beamed, handing me a cup of coffee. I laughed, feeling a rush of excitement mixed with a twinge of nervousness. Despite the circumstances, I was determined to make this the happiest day of my life. The preparations were a flurry of makeup brushes, curling irons, and last-minute touch-ups. Jenna and my bridesmaids kept me occupied with jokes, memories, and pep talks. Still, beneath all the excitement, there was an undeniable emptiness, a reminder that my parents weren't there. I pushed those thoughts away, focusing on the joy that was filling the room. When it was finally time to put on my dress, I took a moment to look at myself in the mirror. I expected to feel sadness, but all I felt was strength. I had made it here despite everything Leah had done, despite the lies and the rejection. I was marrying a man who loved me for who I truly was, and that was all that mattered. The ceremony was held in a small, rustic chapel decorated with wildflowers and candles. As I stood at the back, waiting for the music to start, I felt a rush of emotions, happiness, nervousness, and a touch of bittersweetness. But as the doors opened, and I saw Alex standing at the altar, everything else faded away. His eyes met mine, full of love and warmth, and I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. As I walked down the aisle, I caught glimpses of familiar faces, friends who had supported me through the darkest times. Jenna was grinning wildly, wiping away happy tears. Alex's family was there too, smiling and welcoming me as one of their own. I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. This was my family now, the people who stood by me when it felt like the world had abandoned me. The ceremony was perfect. We exchanged vows we'd written ourselves, and I barely made it through mine without breaking down in tears. "You saved me," I whispered to Alex, my voice cracking with emotion. He squeezed my hands, his eyes shining. "No," he said softly, "we saved each other." After the ceremony, the reception kicked off with laughter, music, and way too much champagne. I had a moment with Jenna on the dance floor, both of us spinning around like we were teenagers again. "You did it," she yelled over the music. "You really did it." I smiled, feeling a rare sense of accomplishment. I had fought for this happiness, and I wasn't going to let anything ruin it. But as the night wore on, reality crept back in. At one point, I found myself alone on the patio, staring at the stars. I couldn't help it. I checked my phone. There it was, a single message from my dad. "I hope you're happy, but I wish you had room for forgiveness." I stared at it for a long time, feeling a mix of anger, disappointment, and deep sadness. It wasn't that I didn't have room for forgiveness. I just couldn't forget. I couldn't erase the years of pain and betrayal as if they had never happened. I put the phone back in my pocket, feeling the weight of unspoken words between us. Alex found me a few minutes later, wrapping his arms around me. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. I nodded, leaning into his embrace. "I'm okay," I whispered, and I meant it, even if there was still a lingering ache inside me. I realized then that I wasn't just mourning the absence of my parents that day. I was mourning the relationship I'd always hoped to have with them. But as Alex pulled me back into the party, the music, laughter, and love surrounded me once again. I looked around at the people who had shown up for me, who had never wavered in their support, and I felt a warmth that filled the empty spaces my family had left behind. This was my new beginning, a chapter defined not by Leah's lies, but by my resilience and the love I had chosen. The night ended with Alex and me sharing a slow dance, just the two of us in the center of the dance floor. "We made it," he whispered, his forehead resting against mine. I smiled through happy tears. Yes, we did. As I looked around one last time, surrounded by the people who mattered most, I felt a profound sense of closure. It wasn't the fairy tale I'd imagined, but it was real, it was mine, and it was enough. A few months had passed since the wedding, and life had settled into a comforting routine. Alex and I were busy furnishing our new home, and for once, things felt stable, like I was truly moving forward. I had made peace with the fact that my parents weren't in my life, and while it still hurt, I'd accepted it as a necessary step for my own healing. Then, out of nowhere, my phone rang. It was Dad. I hadn't heard his voice in so long that for a moment, I just stood there, staring at the screen, unsure of what to do. Finally, I answered, my voice cautious. "Dad." There was a long pause on the other end, followed by a heavy sigh. "We need to talk," he said. I could hear the strain in his voice, the kind of pain that only comes from realizing you've made a terrible mistake. "Leah's in rehab," he continued. "And she's confessed everything." I felt a wave of shock and disbelief crash over me. "What do you mean, everything?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Everything, sweetheart," Dad said quietly. "The drugs, the rumors, all of it. She admitted she lied to get attention. She thought we liked you more, that you were the favorite, and she wanted us to focus on her." The irony was almost unbearable. After years of being treated like the black sheep, Leah had actually believed that I was the favorite? I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat. "So, she just admitted it? Just like that?" I asked, still trying to process this bombshell. "She's been working with a counselor," Dad explained, his voice cracking. "She wanted to tell us everything before she could move forward in her treatment. And she wants to apologize to you face to face." I didn't know what to say. A part of me had dreamed of this moment for years, of hearing Leah admit that she had lied, that I wasn't the monster she'd painted me to be. But now that it was here, I felt more hollow than vindicated. It wasn't just about the lies. It was about the trust that had been shattered, the years I'd spent trying to piece my life back together on my own. Dad's voice broke through my thoughts. "Please come see us. Let's try to fix this." But his words only made me angrier. Fix this? As if it were that simple? I felt a rush of emotion, anger, hurt, and a strange sense of loss for the family I'd never really had. "I don't know if I can, Dad," I said quietly. "It's not just about Leah. It's about you and Margaret. You believed her, without even giving me a chance." He was silent for a moment, and I could tell he was trying to hold back tears. "I know," he finally said, his voice breaking. "I know we failed you, and I'm so sorry. But we want to try to make it right, if you'll let us." I felt my throat tighten. I wanted to scream, to say all the things I'd held back for so long. But instead, I took a deep breath. "I need time," I said finally. "I can't just pretend everything's okay because Leah's in rehab. It's going to take more than that." Dad was quiet, then he whispered, "I understand. Just know that we love you, and we want you back in our lives." "I know," I replied, my voice low. "But it's not that simple." After I hung up, I sat on the couch, numb. Alex found me there, staring blankly at the wall. "What happened?" he asked, sitting beside me. "Leah confessed," I said flatly. "She's in rehab, and she admitted she made everything up." He blinked, surprised. "And your parents?" "They want to fix things," I said, my voice laced with bitterness. "But I don't know if I can." Alex nodded, pulling me close. "You don't have to rush this," he said. "You've spent so long trying to heal. You don't owe them anything, not even forgiveness." I leaned into him, grateful for his steady presence. I knew I needed to confront my feelings, to figure out what I really wanted. Part of me ached for the family I'd lost, but another part of me feared getting hurt again. I wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I'd been through too much, lost too much because of Leah's lies. And while I felt a strange sense of closure in finally hearing the truth, I also felt the weight of everything that had been broken. My life had been shaped by betrayal, and rebuilding trust wasn't something I could just do overnight. In the end, I realized that healing would have to be on my terms, at my own pace. I wasn't sure what the future held with my family, but I knew one thing for sure. I was no longer defined by Leah's lies or my parents' choices. I had fought too hard for my happiness to let anyone take it away again. It's been a few years since my dad called me about Leah's confession. Life has finally found a rhythm that feels right. Alex and I bought a small house in a quiet neighborhood, and I've surrounded myself with people who love me for who I really am. I've managed to build a life that I'm proud of, piece by piece, free from the shadow of Leah's lies. Leah's attempt to reach out came out of nowhere. One day, while I was at work, I received a long email from her. She wrote about her recovery, therapy sessions, and the regret that apparently haunted her. She apologized for everything, every lie, every manipulation, every moment that shattered my trust. "I know I've hurt you more than words can fix," she wrote, "but I want to make amends face to face." I stared at the screen for a long time, my emotions all over the place. I wanted to feel relief, but instead, I felt a strange mix of anger and pity. Was she sincere? Did she really understand the damage she'd caused? Or was this just another attempt to rewrite the narrative? Part of me was tempted to agree to meet her, maybe for some sense of closure, maybe to finally say the things I'd kept bottled up for so long. But another part of me recoiled at the thought of seeing her, of letting her back into my life in any capacity. That night, I told Alex about the email. He listened patiently, then asked the question I was dreading. "What do you want to do?" I sighed, feeling the weight of the decision pressing on me. "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me wants to hear her out, but another part of me just can't. "I'm scared it'll open up old wounds." Alex nodded. "It's okay not to know. You don't have to rush into anything. Just remember that this decision is for you, not for Leah or anyone else." And that's when it hit me, how much I had changed. I wasn't the desperate, broken person I'd been when Leah's lies first unraveled my life. I'd learned to put my own needs first, to value my own peace over a broken family dynamic. I'd found love, stability, and a sense of self-worth that Leah couldn't take away from me, no matter how many times she tried. I wasn't living in the past anymore. I was living for myself. But the question of forgiveness lingered. Could I ever truly forgive Leah? I wasn't sure. Forgiving her felt like letting go of a part of myself, a part that had fought tooth and nail to rebuild after she tore me down. Maybe forgiveness wasn't the right word. Maybe it was acceptance, accepting that Leah had been a part of my story, but that she didn't define who I was now. I hadn't replied to Leah's email yet, and I wasn't sure if I ever would. But I knew one thing for sure. I would never forget how easily my family had believed her lies, how quickly they'd chosen her side. I'd learned the hard way that sometimes, the people who are supposed to protect us are the ones who hurt us the most. And that's okay. I've made peace with the fact that not all wounds fully heal. Some remain as scars, reminders of what I've endured and overcome. Maybe one day, I'll find it in me to forgive Leah. Maybe I'll even see her, look her in the eye, and truly let go of the past. But for now, I'm focusing on the present, on the life I've built, the love I've found, and the peace I've fought so hard to maintain. It's not the closure I'd once imagined, but it's enough. And sometimes, enough is all we need to keep moving forward.